I never imagined that the night meant to celebrate my sister's happiness would become the moment my entire life quietly shifted. My sister Evelyn's engagement party was beautiful in the way carefully planned events always are. Warm lights stretched across the backyard, white flowers lined every surface, and laughter floated through the air as if nothing uncomfortable could ever exist there. Everything looked perfect, rehearsed, controlled. So when Evelyn laughed into her champagne glass and told a group of guests that I was just admin at the courthouse, the sound cut deeper than I expected. People chuckled politely. Someone tapped a spoon against their glass. The moment passed quickly, the way small humiliations often do when they're disguised as jokes. My chest burned, but I stayed quiet like I always had. Silence had become my survival skill. If I didn't react, things stayed smooth. If I didn't explain, no one felt challenged. That was the role I'd learned to play in my family. My name is Verity, and for as long as I can remember, my family has loved neat labels. The kind that fit easily into conversation. The kind that don't invite curiosity. Evelyn was always introduced as the impressive one, ambitious, charismatic, naturally magnetic. She could walk into a room and somehow become its center without trying. Me. I was the quiet one. The reliable one. She works at the courthouse. That phrase followed me everywhere. Thanksgiving dinners. Birthday parties. Phone calls from relatives I barely remembered. "So you're still doing admin work?" They'd ask, smiling as if they were being supportive. I would nod. Yeah. Still there. And the conversation would move on. What they never saw was how carefully I'd learned to stay invisible around them. Not because I was ashamed, but because every time I tried to explain what I actually did, their attention drifted. Eyes glazed over. Smiles stiffened. I learned early that my real accomplishments made people uncomfortable, especially Evelyn. So I softened my words. Rounded the edges. Let them believe the smaller version of me because it kept the peace. At home the pattern never changed. Evelyn talked. Everyone listened. My parents leaned forward when she spoke about her work, her plans, her milestones. When I spoke, forks scraped plates. Someone reached for more wine. It wasn't cruelty. It was habit. And habits, once formed, are difficult to break. There was only one person who ever seemed to notice the difference. My cousin Lily. He saw the late nights. The way I carried myself. The way my phone buzzed at strange hours. She never asked questions in front of others, but sometimes she'd squeeze my hand under the table, a quiet reminder that I wasn't invisible everywhere. I told myself I didn't need validation from my family. I told myself their opinions didn't matter. That was only half true. Because every time Evelyn laughed about my courthouse job, something inside me tightened. Not anger. Not jealousy. Something quieter. Heavier. A pressure that built slowly year after year. By the time her engagement party arrived, I already knew how the night would go. I'd arrive early. I'd help where needed. I'd smile when introduced. I'd leave before anyone noticed I was gone. I didn't expect respect. I didn't expect curiosity. What I didn't expect was a question that refused to let the lie survive another minute. The party was exactly what you'd expect from Evelyn. Picture perfect and designed to impress. String lights glowed like a staged sunset. A banner with her and Daniel's names hung high, watching over us like a declaration. I arrived early because I always did. Before I could even put my purse down, my mother handed me a stack of napkins and gestured toward the drink table. "Can you help over there?" she said, already turning away. No eye contact. No pause. By the time guests arrived, I'd refilled ice twice and wiped down a counter no one had touched. I told myself it was fine. I was used to this role. Useful, quiet, out of the way. Then Evelyn arrived, glowing, confident, diamond catching the light like it had its own spotlight. People gathered around her instantly. Compliments flew. Cameras flashed. Her fiancé Daniel followed close behind. Calm, polished, observant. He smiled easily, listening more than he spoke. At first he barely looked at me. Until Evelyn made sure he did. Evelyn spotted me standing near the edge of the crowd and waved me over like I was an afterthought she'd almost forgotten. I already knew what was coming. I had seen this scene play out in different forms my entire life. "Come here," she said brightly, looping an arm around my shoulder. "I don't think everyone's met my sister." She smiled wide, the kind of smile meant for cameras. "This is Verity. She works at the courthouse." A few polite nods followed. Mild interest. Faces that were already preparing to move on. She's just admin, Evelyn added with a laugh. Keeps things organized. Answers phones. You know how it is. Someone chuckled. Another guest smiled like that single sentence had explained everything they needed to know about me. I felt the familiar heat rise in my chest. The instinct to smooth it over kicked in immediately. Stay quiet. Let it pass. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. I stared into my glass and took a slow breath. This wasn't new. It was just louder. But Daniel didn't laugh. I noticed it the moment his expression shifted. He was looking at me now, really looking. Not with curiosity or politeness, but with hesitation, like something didn't quite line up in his mind. His smile faded just slightly, as if he were flipping through memories that refused to settle. Dinner was announced and the crowd drifted toward the table. I took a seat near the end, exactly where I was expected to be. Toasts were made. Evelyn soaked in every word, every compliment, every clink of glasses raised in her honor. Then she stood again. Some people argue important cases, she said, nodding proudly toward Daniel. And some people answer phones. She turned her head just enough for her eyes to land on me. Right, Verity? The table laughed softly. Not cruelly. Comfortably. That's when Daniel turned fully in his chair and looked straight at me. Wait, he said slowly. Verity, what exactly do you do at the courthouse? The table went still. Not because anyone was being polite, but because the question didn't belong in the script. It hovered in the air, awkward and exposed, like a wire pulled loose from the wall. Every eye shifted toward me, and suddenly there was nowhere left for the lie to hide. I didn't answer right away. I looked down at my hands resting on the table. My thumb traced the rim of my glass. The wood beneath my fingers felt cool and solid. I could hear the faint hum of the string lights overhead, the distant clatter of dishes from inside the house. Life going on even as something inside me cracked open. In that pause, memories rushed in. Every holiday where I was asked to help set up instead of sit. Every dinner where my work was summarized into a single word that made people comfortable. Every time I'd chosen silence because it felt easier than watching disappointment flicker across my parents' faces. I remembered standing alone in my apartment late at night, shoes still on, rereading case notes, preparing for another long day. I remembered knowing none of it would ever be mentioned at the table. And suddenly, I understood something I'd never allowed myself to admit. I hadn't been protecting my family by staying quiet. I'd been protecting the version of me they preferred. The smaller one. The one who didn't challenge anyone's pride. Across the table, Evelyn was smiling too hard now. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes sharp. She sensed the shift even if she didn't yet understand it. My mother stared down at her plate. My father lifted his glass, then set it back down again without drinking. Daniel was still watching me, not impatient, not mocking. Just waiting. The old instinct whispered to soften it. Say something vague. Keep the peace. Let the night move on. But another feeling rose up, calm and steady. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. If I spoke now, the truth would land. If I stayed silent, the lie would continue living and I would keep shrinking to make room for it. This wasn't about embarrassing my sister or proving anything to a table full of people who had never really asked. It was about refusing to disappear anymore. I straightened in my chair and set my glass down. The sound was small, but it cut cleanly through the silence. My heartbeat slowed. The fear I'd carried for years loosened its grip. I looked at Daniel first, then at my parents, then finally at Evelyn. And in that moment I knew there was no going back. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I didn't explain. I said one word. Judge. It landed softly, almost politely, but the effect was immediate. The air shifted, not dramatically, not explosively, but like someone had turned off the background noise of the world. Conversations died mid-breath. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the string lights seemed to hum louder in the sudden quiet. My mother's face drained of color so fast it startled me. Her lips parted, then closed again as if she were searching for a sentence she'd never rehearsed. My father blinked hard, gripping his glass before setting it down carefully, like it might shatter if he wasn't gentle. Evelyn laughed. It was sharp and brittle. "Oh my God," she said, waving a hand. "Very funny." I didn't look at her. Daniel hadn't laughed. He hadn't moved at all. His expression had changed in a way I recognized instantly. Not confusion, not anger, but recognition finally snapping into place. "Judge," he repeated quietly. Then his eyes widened just a fraction. "Verity Cole," he said slowly. "The courthouse downtown." No one breathed. "You presided over my case last year," he continued. "The corporate dispute. I stood in front of you more than once." The silence deepened. Evelyn's smile froze. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. "She works admin. She answers phones." Daniel didn't look at her. "I know what admin work looks like," he said calmly. "And I know what a judge looks like." He turned back to me. "You were fair. Direct. You listened. That's why I remember." And just like that, the truth had nowhere left to hide. For a moment after Daniel's words, no one moved. The night seemed to hold its breath, suspended between what everyone thought they knew and what they had just learned. The string lights above us glowed softly, almost mockingly, as if nothing had changed, yet everything had. My father was the first to speak. "You're a judge?" he asked, disbelief thick in his voice. "Since when?" "3 years," I said evenly. My mother shook her head slowly, like the word itself didn't make sense to her. "But you said you were assisting someone. You said you were helping." I replied. "At the beginning." I paused. No one ever asked after that. That was when it hit them. Not all at once, but gradually, like a truth sinking into water. The story they'd been repeating for years hadn't been wrong because I lied. It had been wrong because it was convenient. Because it fit the balance they were used to. Because it didn't threaten the version of the family they understood. Evelyn pushed her chair back slightly, eyes darting between faces. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You let everyone believe you were admin. Who does that?" I met her gaze for the first time that night. "I didn't lie," I said. "I stopped correcting you." Her face flushed. "You did this on purpose," she snapped. "You waited until my engagement party to embarrass me." I shook my head. "You embarrassed yourself. I answered a question you asked, in front of everyone." She turned to Daniel, her voice rising. You knew she was a judge and didn't tell me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I didn't connect Judge Cole to your sister," he said. "You never said her last name." He paused. "And you never let her speak." That landed harder than anything I could have said. Around the table, reactions rippled outward. My uncle stared down at his hands, muttering something I couldn't hear. My aunt avoided eye contact. My grandmother reached across the table and squeezed my wrist gently, her grip warm and steady. "I always knew," she said softly. "You carried yourself differently." Evelyn stood abruptly. Her chair scraped against the stone patio, the sound sharp enough to slice through the silence. "This is my night," she said, her voice shaking now. "And you've ruined it. You always do this. You always find a way to make everything about you." I stayed seated. My voice was calm when I answered. "Until tonight I stayed quiet. Until you mocked me. Until you reduced me to a joke in front of your fiancé and our family. That was a choice." Her mouth opened then closed. For the first time she didn't have a comeback ready. Daniel stood slowly. "Evelyn," he said carefully. "Don't," she cut him off. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I'm on the side of the truth," he said. "And I don't know how I missed this. How I let you talk about your own sister like that." That was the moment it broke. Not loudly. Not explosively. But completely. Evelyn looked around the table and realized the attention she'd always commanded wasn't hers anymore. No one was laughing. No one was defending her. My parents sat frozen, caught between the daughter they had always praised and the one they had never truly seen. "This is unbelievable," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You think you're better than me now?" I shook my head. "No. I think I finally stopped pretending to be less." Something raw flickered across her face. Fear maybe, or the sudden loss of control. Then she turned and walked inside, heels striking the floor like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. Daniel hesitated, looking at me. There was conflict in his eyes, but also respect. "I need to talk to her," he said quietly. I nodded. After they left, the table stayed silent. Champagne went warm. Plates sat untouched. The celebration had dissolved into something far more honest. My mother reached for my hand. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, her voice small. I didn't pull away. because every time I tried to be seen, I said, you looked away. No one argued. And in that stillness something unfamiliar settled in my chest. Not triumph. Not revenge. Relief. It felt like setting down a weight I'd been carrying for years and realizing I didn't have to pick it back up again. The next morning I woke to a quiet phone and a strange sense of calm. No dred. No replaying the night in my head. Just sunlight through the blinds and the steady hum of the city outside my window. Then the messages started. Missed calls. Long texts. Short apologies that felt clumsy but sincere. Relatives who suddenly wanted to catch up. My parents left 2 voicemails. I listened to neither. Around midday there was a knock at my door. It was Daniel. He looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept but had done a lot of thinking. We sat on opposite ends of my couch, coffee cooling between us. I can't unsee it now, he said. The way she spoke to you. The way everyone let it happen. I nodded. There wasn't anything to add. I don't know what this means for us yet, he admitted. But I know I can't ignore it. When he left, the apartment felt lighter. Not empty, just honest. A few days later, Evelyn showed up unannounced. No mock-up. Hair pulled back. The version of her that never appeared at family gatherings. We didn't hug. We didn't fight. I was scared, she said finally. Of being ordinary. Of being second. I believed her. I'm not here to compete, I told her. I never was. She nodded slowly, like she was hearing that for the first time. We weren't suddenly close. Nothing was fixed overnight. But something had shifted. Change didn't arrive all at once. It never does. Came quietly in small, unfamiliar ways that took time to recognize. After the engagement party, my family didn't suddenly transform into thoughtful, emotionally fluent people. There were no dramatic apologies or long speeches. What there was instead were pauses. Moments where they stopped assuming, stopped talking over me, stopped reducing my life to something easy to swallow. At the first family dinner after everything happened, my mother asked me a question she had never asked before. How's work? Not the polite version. Not the version designed to end the conversation quickly. She waited after asking it. She waited. I told her about a case I'd been working on. About the weight of making decisions that affected real lives. About the responsibility that followed me home some nights whether I wanted it to or not. No one interrupted. No one checked their phone. My father listened, his hands folded in front of him like he was trying to memorize something important. Felt strange. And real. Evelyn kept her distance at first. Family gatherings became quieter, more careful. When she did speak, it wasn't with the same effortless confidence she used to carry. Something had cracked, and while that kind of break is painful, it's also honest. She was learning who she was without being the center of the room. We spoke occasionally. Short conversations. Neutral ground. She never apologized directly for the party, but she stopped making jokes at my expense. Sometimes growth looks like silence where there used to be cruelty. Daniel and I crossed paths only once after that. At a cafe downtown. He looked lighter, calmer. He thanked me not for the truth itself but for refusing to hide it. He said it had forced him to ask questions he should have asked long before. We didn't talk about Evelyn. We didn't need to. Life settled into something new. At work nothing had changed. My days were still long. My responsibilities were still heavy. But something inside me was different. I no longer felt the need to minimize myself when conversations drifted toward my career. When someone asked what I did, I answered fully. Not defensively. Not proudly. Just honestly. I used to think staying quiet was the same as being kind. I was wrong. Silence didn't protect anyone. It didn't preserve harmony. It only taught people how small they could make me. There's a strange grief that comes with being unseen by the people who raised you. You don't realize how heavy it is until you finally put it down. Once you do, you understand how much energy you spent carrying it. Lily noticed the change immediately. She smiled at me across dinner tables, the same knowing smile she'd always given me, but now there was relief in it. I no longer needed her quiet reminders. I stood on my own. My parents started asking real questions. Not just about my job but about my life. My apartment. My routines. The things that mattered to me. Sometimes their curiosity felt awkward, like they were learning a new language too late. But I answered anyway. Not because I owed them but because I finally could. Evelyn and I never became close the way sisters in movies do. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful hugging in the rain. What we built instead was distance with boundaries. Respect without intimacy. And for the first time that felt enough. One evening, while walking home after a long day, I passed the courthouse just as the sun dipped behind it. The building stood solid and quiet, unchanged. I paused for a moment, watching people move in and out, each carrying their own version of pressure and purpose. I realized something then. My power had never come from the title. It had come from my willingness to hold truth even when it was uncomfortable. From choosing not to shrink just to keep others comfortable. The engagement party hadn't given me my voice. It had revealed that I'd always had one. I'd just been taught not to use it. If you've ever been labeled in a way that made you easier to dismiss, know this. You don't owe anyone the smallest version of yourself. You don't owe silence to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. And you don't need a dramatic moment to claim your space. Sometimes all it takes is answering one question honestly. I still walk into rooms quietly. I still listen more than I speak. Those things didn't change. What changed is that I no longer disappear. I let people be surprised. And if that makes them uncomfortable, I let that be theirs to carry. Because being seen isn't about proving your worth. It's about refusing to deny it. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, minimized, or mislabeled, share your experience. Your voice matters more than you've been taught to believe. And remember, you don't need permission to be who you already are.